Someone is asking you a question right now. Maybe it's your boss. Maybe it's a friend. Maybe it's someone who smiles at you every single day. And here's what nobody ever told you. Some questions are not questions at all. They are traps, dressed in curiosity, wrapped in concern, delivered with a smile. Machiavelli knew this 500 years ago, and the people who understood him, they never fell for it again. Welcome back if you're new here. This channel exists for one reason, to show you the mechanics of human behavior that most people are never taught. Not in school, not by their parents, not anywhere. Today we're going to talk about something that sounds simple on the surface, but cuts very deep once you understand it. 5 questions, just 5 questions that appear completely innocent. Questions that feel like normal conversation. Questions that, on any ordinary day, you would answer without a second thought. But these 5 questions share something in common that most people never notice. When you answer them, you don't give information. You give power. You hand over leverage. You open a door inside yourself that some people, not all but some, will walk straight through. Niccolò Machiavelli spent his life studying power. Not the kind that makes you feel good about yourself. The real kind, the kind that operates in silence, in shadow, beneath the surface of every relationship, every conversation, every institution. He watched princes rise and fall. He watched loyal men become weapons and weapons become loyal men. And what he found was this: the most dangerous moments in power dynamics are rarely the dramatic ones. They are the quiet ones, the casual ones, the ones disguised as ordinary human connection. This is not about becoming paranoid. This is not about trusting no one. This is about understanding the architecture of manipulation well enough that it can never be used against you without your awareness. By the end of this video, you will look at certain conversations differently, you will feel certain questions land differently, and you will understand, perhaps for the first time, exactly what someone is doing when they ask you things they have no business knowing. Let's go picture this. You're in a job interview. The room is well lit. The interviewer across from you seems warm, professional, genuinely interested. And then they lean slightly forward and ask, with a comfortable smile, "So, what would you say is your biggest weakness?" Or maybe it's not an interview, maybe it's a new relationship, maybe it's someone at a dinner party who seems fascinated by you, maybe it's a colleague who appears to be building genuine rapport, and somewhere in the conversation, the question surfaces, casual, disarming. What do you struggle with the most? Here is what Machiavelli understood about power that most people completely miss. He wrote that the wise ruler must never reveal his vulnerabilities to anyone who has not already proven complete and unconditional loyalty. Because information about weakness is not merely information, it is ammunition, and ammunition does not know the difference between a friend and an enemy, only the person holding it does. Now, before you think this is cynical, let's look at it psychologically. Carl Jung gave us the concept of the shadow. The parts of ourselves we hide, suppress, deny, because they feel like liabilities, our fears, our insecurities, our unresolved wounds. These are real, they are human, and in the right context, with a therapist, with a true intimate, with someone who has earned that access, vulnerability is not weakness, it is connection. But here's the distinction that matters, and it's a sharp one. There is a difference between voluntary vulnerability with a trusted person and strategic disclosure to someone who is fundamentally probing your architecture. When someone asks you, "What's your weakness?" in a context that has not yet established genuine safety, they are not asking because they care about your growth. They may not even know they're doing it consciously, but what they are doing psychologically is mapping you. They are identifying where you can be pressured, where your confidence fractures, where guilt or shame can be applied to influence your behavior later. In social psychology, this is sometimes called vulnerability extraction. And it is extraordinarily common in manipulative personality types, not because those people are necessarily evil, but because they have learned somewhere in life that knowing someone's weak point gives them control. It's a survival mechanism, weaponized. The Stoics had a phrase for this kind of strategic self-protection: retreat into yourself. Guard the interior, not from everyone, but from those who have not yet earned entry. So what do you do when this question appears? You do not lie, you do not panic. You do not become cold or suspicious in a way that reveals your awareness. Instead, you do what every masterful communicator does. You answer the shape of the question without answering the substance of it. You offer something that sounds honest, but reveals nothing that can be used. Something real, something even humble-sounding, but nothing that gives someone a lever to pull on your soul. I sometimes take on too much because I care about the outcome. That's a real human trait. It says nothing useful to a predator. It opens no door. Machiavelli would smile at that, because protecting yourself isn't dishonesty. It's wisdom wearing the mask of openness. Now we enter darker territory. This question doesn't always arrive so directly. More often it sounds like this. Who do you talk to about things like this? Is there anyone you can really rely on? Who knows you better than anyone? Different words, same trap. When someone asks you who you trust, they are not interested in your inner circle for sentimental reasons. They are consciously or unconsciously doing something that Machiavelli described in The Prince with cold precision. They are identifying the nodes in your network of loyalty, your support system, your allies, and here's why that is dangerous information. If someone wants to influence you, pressure you, or isolate you, they need to know who might counteract that influence, who might warn you, who might give you perspective that disrupts their access to you. The people you trust are in the architecture of manipulation, obstacles, or alternatively, leverage points. Because the people you love and trust are the people who can be used against you. Nietzsche wrote about what he called the will to power, not as a violent force, but as the fundamental drive beneath all human behavior to expand influence and overcome resistance. Even in ordinary people, in ordinary relationships, this drive operates unconsciously. People want control over their environment. And in social environments, the most powerful thing you can control is someone's emotional connections. Think about how this plays out in reality, in toxic relationships, romantic or professional. One of the earliest and most consistent patterns is a subtle undermining of the target's outside relationships. Your friend doesn't really get you the way I do. Does your family really support what you're trying to do? I'm just saying, be careful who you talk to about this. None of that is possible without a map. And you hand them the map when you answer, who do you trust, to someone who hasn't proven they deserve to know. Jung would frame this through the lens of the persona, the social face we present versus the deep interior, where our genuine attachments live. The interior is sacred. It should not be offered casually. When someone asks you who you trust, you can acknowledge the spirit of the question. I have people I'm close to, without drawing them a diagram of your emotional architecture, because in the hands of the wrong person, that diagram becomes a roadmap for dismantling you. Stop for a moment. We are moving through these 5 questions, and I want you to notice something. Every single one of them sounds like connection. They sound like intimacy. They sound like someone who genuinely wants to understand you. That is precisely what makes them effective. The most sophisticated manipulation never arrives wearing a mask. It arrives wearing your language, your tone, your emotional needs. It arrives sounding exactly like what you've been waiting for someone to finally ask. And this question, what are you most afraid of, is perhaps the most seductive of all. Because fear is at the center of everything. Nietzsche said that courage is not the absence of fear, but the capacity to move through it. The Stoics built entire philosophies around the deliberate confrontation of what frightens us, in private as a practice of inner fortitude. Notice in private as an internal exercise, not as information offered to those around you. In the hands of a skilled manipulator, knowledge of your deepest fear is the master key to your psychology. Fear of abandonment. They will weaponize withdrawal. Fear of failure. They will manufacture situations where failure seems imminent unless you comply. Fear of rejection. They will withhold approval strategically. Fear of conflict. They will use your discomfort with tension to push boundaries further than you would ever otherwise allow. This is not theoretical. This is the documented playbook of coercive control, of narcissistic manipulation, of what psychologists call fear-based compliance, one of the most powerful and least visible forms of influence that exists in human relationships. Machiavelli observed that the prince who knows what his enemies and subordinates fear holds the court. He didn't celebrate this, he documented it. He was a realist, not a sadist. He understood that power flows toward whoever holds the most complete psychological map of those around them, and fear is the deepest coordinate on that map. Here's what's interesting though. This doesn't mean you should never speak about your fears. It means you should be extraordinarily careful about when, where, and to whom that information travels. A therapist who has signed ethical commitments. A partner who has demonstrated, across time and action, that they do not use what you share against you. A close friend whose loyalty has been tested and proven. Not the new acquaintance who seems unusually fascinated with your interior life. Not the colleague who asks probing questions in casual conversation. Not the person who, when you share something vulnerable, seems to file it away rather than meet it with warmth. Trust your instincts on this one. And if you haven't been trusting your instincts, start now. The body knows things before the mind does. Let me ask you something directly. Has anyone ever used something you told them in confidence, in a moment of openness against you? Not necessarily in a dramatic, obvious way. Maybe in something subtle, a passing comment that landed strangely, a moment where you felt with quiet certainty that your vulnerability had become someone else's advantage. If that's ever happened to you, you already understand what we're discussing here. The next two questions are the ones most people never suspect. Because they don't sound like questions about weakness or fear or trust at all, they sound like something entirely different. Pay close attention to what comes next. You're having a conversation, things are comfortable, there's rapport in the air, and then almost in passing someone asks, "What do you honestly think about this person between us?" This is one of the oldest and most elegant traps in the social landscape. On the surface, it seems like an invitation to candor, a moment of shared intimacy, two people being real with each other. There's even a kind of flattery in it. They're asking for your honest opinion, which implies they value your perspective. But let's dissect what is actually happening here. First, consider the phrase "between us." Those two words are doing enormous psychological work. They are constructing a false sense of sealed space, a private corridor that exists only between you and them. This triggers your inner need for belonging, for alliance, for the feeling of being chosen as a confidant. It is activating what social psychologists call in-group bonding mechanics. Second, consider what you are being asked to produce: your genuine, unfiltered assessment of another person, an opinion that by definition can be shared, an opinion that once spoken exists outside your control. In Machiavellian political thought, the triangulation of relationships using what person A says about person B to influence person C's position is a classic power move. It appears in courts, in boardrooms, in families, in friend groups. Its structure is always the same. Extract candid information from one node in the network. Deploy it strategically to alter the configuration of the network. You say something honest about a colleague. It gets back to them, slightly altered, slightly amplified. Now there is friction where there wasn't before. Now you have an enemy you didn't know you made. Now the person who asked the question has reorganized the room and you handed them the tool to do it. But there's a deeper psychological layer here. When you speak negatively about someone, even accurately, even justifiably, you reveal something about your own value system, your standards, your judgments, your internal hierarchy. And that information in the wrong hands can be turned back on you. You said this about them. What do you say about me when I'm not in the room? The seed of doubt is planted. The question of your loyalty is introduced. The Stoics warned against speaking about others at great length for exactly this reason. Not because it is always dishonest, but because it is always risky and rarely as necessary as the moment makes it feel. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations that we should concern ourselves with what we control, and that our words, once released, are no longer within our control. He was an emperor surrounded by courtiers and politicians and flatterers, all of whom were experts at this particular game. The response here is not to seem evasive or cold, it is to redirect with grace. They seem competent to me. I don't know them that well. Neutral. unremarkable. Nothing that can be turned into a weapon. Let people think your discretion is indifference. It is, in fact, intelligence. This one is perhaps the most psychologically complex of all five. Not because the question is rare, it's actually one of the most common questions in human interaction, but because of what it demands from you at the level of consciousness. When someone asks, why did you do that in the context of a decision, a choice, a behavior they disapprove of or feel affected by, they are not simply seeking information. They are creating a tribunal. They are placing you in the position of defendant, and the moment you begin to explain yourself, to justify, to clarify your reasoning, you are accepting the role. You're entering a frame in which your choices require external validation, and within that frame, no answer you give will ever be fully sufficient. This is a mechanism of control so powerful that most people deploy it without any conscious awareness of what they're doing. Here's why it works. Human beings are extraordinarily vulnerable to the feeling of not being understood. Jung described our fundamental drive toward individuation, toward being recognized as the particular irreducible person that we are. When someone implies through this question that your behavior needs justification, they are triggering that vulnerability. The desperate need to explain yourself, to be seen correctly, to close the gap between who you know yourself to be and who they are implying you might be. And so you talk. You go deeper. You reveal the internal logic of your decisions, your motivations, your fears, your self-doubts, all in the service of getting them to understand. But here is what Machiavelli would tell you, and it is blunt, as he always was. You do not owe anyone access to your inner logic. A decision you have made thoughtfully or made imperfectly, is yours. Your reasoning is yours, and the moment you begin the exhausting project of justifying yourself to those who fundamentally want you to feel accountable to their judgment, you have entered a game you cannot win, because every answer you give will produce another question. Every explanation opens another door. But why did you think that way? But didn't you consider? But how could you not see? This is what therapists call JADE: justify, argue, defend, explain. And it is the primary mechanism through which people with controlling tendencies maintain psychological dominance over those around them. Not through violence, not through obvious coercion, but through the endless, exhausting demand for explanation, dressed as concern or confusion or hurt. The Stoics had a clear answer to this. Epictetus, a former slave who built one of the most powerful frameworks of inner freedom ever conceived, was relentless on this point. Your choices belong to you. What others think of your choices is in the domain of their minds, and that domain is not your responsibility. This does not mean you should be indifferent to genuine feedback. It does not mean accountability is meaningless. It means that the demand for justification issued by someone whose primary goal is control rather than understanding deserves a very different response than the one your emotional vulnerability wants to give. Sometimes the most powerful answer to why did you do that is a calm, unhurried, unashamed because I decided to full stop. No apology in your voice, no anxiety in your eyes. Just the quiet, unshakable certainty of a person who knows they do not need to be tried by those who did not appoint themselves your judge. That is not arrogance. That is the final expression of what Machiavelli, Jung, Nietzsche, and the Stoics were all pointing at, the sovereignty of the self. Let me bring all five of these together, because there's a thread running through each of them that I want you to hold on to. What is your weakness, mapping your fault lines? Who do you trust? Identifying your support structure so it can be navigated or dismantled. What are you most afraid of? Locating the deepest lever in your psychology. What do you really think about them? Extracting intelligence that reorganizes the room around you. Why did you do that? Placing you on trial and demanding that you defend your inner life to someone who has appointed themselves your judge. These five questions share a fundamental architecture. They are all requests for interior access. They all create a moment where the natural human impulse toward openness, connection, and being understood is turned against itself. And here is the important thing, the thing that separates wisdom from paranoia. Most people who ask these questions are not conscious operators. They are not sitting at a chessboard planning your destruction. They are in most cases running subconscious patterns that they themselves were never taught to examine. They learned, at some point in life, that information is safety, that knowing more about people gives you stability in an unpredictable world. They may even believe they are asking because they care. This does not make the questions less dangerous, it makes them more dangerous, because at least a conscious manipulator is someone you can eventually detect. An unconscious one is harder to see, and in their own way harder to protect yourself from. What Machiavelli was offering was not cynicism, he was offering clarity. He was saying, look at the world as it is, not as you wish it were. Understand the mechanics of power, not to exploit others, but so that others cannot exploit you without your awareness. Jung would add something to that. He would say that the degree to which you are vulnerable to these questions is the degree to which you have not done the interior work of knowing yourself. Because when you know yourself, when you have looked at your own weaknesses, fears, attachments, and wounds with clear and compassionate eyes, no one else's curiosity about them can destabilize you. You have already had the harder conversation alone in the dark. Nietzsche would say, become who you are, and in becoming who you are, stop needing external validation to confirm your existence. The person who needs to be understood by everyone is enslaved to everyone. The person who understands themselves has a kind of freedom that no question can reach, and the Stoics would simply say, guard the inner citadel. Your mind, your reasoning, your values, your commitments, these are yours. They are the only things truly yours in this world. Protect them not with aggression, but with quiet, consistent intelligence. The next time you feel the pull to answer fully, to open completely, to explain everything, pause, ask yourself who is asking. What have they done to earn this level of access to my interior? What is the risk if this information lands in the wrong hands or lands in the wrong moment? You don't have to answer every question that is asked of you. You don't have to justify every choice you've made. You don't have to map your fears for every curious person who sits across from you. Privacy is not deception. Discretion is not coldness. Knowing when to speak and when to remain unrevealing. That is one of the oldest and least celebrated forms of intelligence that exists. If something in this video landed for you, if you recognized a pattern, a conversation, a moment where one of these questions pulled something from you that you later regretted sharing, then I want you to sit with that, not with guilt, not with anger, but with the kind of calm, analytical curiosity that makes you harder to reach next time. There's a lot more to explore on this channel. The psychology of silence, the power of strategic ambiguity, what the greatest thinkers in history understood about navigating environments where not everyone means you well. If you're ready to go deeper, you know what to do. And if this made you think even a little differently, even about one conversation you've had, then it did exactly what it was designed to do. Stay aware, stay sovereign, and be very careful which questions you answer.